Every so often, a person from another country will make a big splash in America. Usually nothing comes of this except their name is kicked around for a while, and then they slip into the deep pool of potential trivial pursuit questions. Back in the 1980s and 90s, such a figure was Milan Kundera. He had two huge hits, The Book of Laughter and Forgetting and The Unbearable Lightness of Being. I was aware of him, but I did not read either of those books, though I sure did admire their titles. The other day I was in the library and I saw a book by Milan Kundera. It was a slim volume and non-fiction, a collection of essays, so I took it home and read it. The title was Encounter. I liked that title too. I knew a little about him. He was a Czech writer, forced from his country by war and political suppression. He emigrated to France, and his books were about people who had been forced to leave their homelands and were trying to establish lives as expatriates, with some sex added, which never hurts sales in America. This was extremely interesting to me now, as much of the world seems war-torn and millions of people are fleeing their countries and living as refugees. There is also, in this fierce world, the question of freedom of expression, which I was considering along with the House Un-American Activities Committee and Dalton Trumbo. Kundera writes, the second half of the 20th century has made everyone extremely sensitive to the fate of people forced out of their homelands. This compassionate sensitivity has befogged the problem of exile with a tear-stained moralism and obscured the actual nature of life for the exile. He says it can be a liberating launch toward another place, an elsewhere, by definition unknown and open to all sorts of possibilities. He notes that when communism collapsed in Russia, there was no surge among the artistic emigres to return. When I was very young, school children were routinely presented with a short story, The Man Without a Country. The insistent moral of the story was that the worst fate that could happen to a person was to be banished by your country and be taken in by no other. Kundera suggests otherwise. He embraces the life of the nomad, of the exile. He quotes a fellow emigre as follows, the writer is, above all, a free person, and the obligation to preserve his independence against all constraints comes before any other consideration. And I mean not only the insane constraints imposed by an absolute political power, but the restrictions, all the harder to escape because they are well-intentioned, that cite a sense of duty to one's country. This does seem to me to be a high ideal for personal freedom. But I also think that nation-states, far from protecting their citizens, and often in the name of protecting their citizens, seem to exist to flower contention into war. And then they send their young people marching into a war. It is difficult for me to summon pride in being an American. When I look at the past or the present, it feels more like a shame than a boast. And instead of things improving through awareness and inclusion, it seems like the situation is becoming more and more intractable, much less worthy. Kundera writes that the novel, as a form of writing, was always about human integrity and identity, the dignity of the individual, no matter who and no matter what the conditions of the times. The 1914 war, which he calls that gigantic, absurd massacre, changed that, creating, he writes, a new epoch in which history, imperative and avid, rears up before a man and seizes hold of him. Henceforth men will primarily be shaped from the outside. Your fate will be determined for you, marching you off to war or a confinement camp. And this, if true, has great implications for the novel as well. Kundera forced three things upon me. Because of his writing and his love for music, a gift from his father, I had to listen to some work by Leos Janáček. And then I had to burrow into the internet and find A Warsaw Survivor by Arnold Schoenberg. I knew a little about Schoenberg, something about atonal music, which I thought was strictly a development of the intellect. Then I was exposed to this 6 or 7 minute piece, and I could see how perfectly the music matched what he was almost desperately trying to express. Given his subject matter, a Warsaw survivor, there is no other way the music could sound. And the music obviously came from his heart, if not the soul. Finally, I have to read The Skin, a novel by Curzio Malaparte. I'm not looking forward to it, but I have to do it at Kundera's command, and I'll report on it when I do.